From the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., welcome to the Kalb Report, a conversation with Elie Wiesel, the Bible, the War, and the Media. Now our moderator, Marvin Kalb.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and to another edition of the Kalb Report, a public policy program co-sponsored by the George Washington University, the National Press Club, and the Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I'm Marvin Kalb, a senior fellow at the Shorenstein Center. This edition is called A Conversation with Elie Wiesel, the Bible, the War, and the Media. It is being carried by Washington Post Radio, XM Satellite Radio, Minnesota Public Radio, New England Cable News, and Oklahoma Educational Television is making it available to PBS stations around the country. The Kalb Report is underwritten by the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. If you are not with us tonight, you cannot see the hundreds of people who have crowded into the main ballroom of the National Press Club to witness this conversation. I'm told it's a record crowd. I am not surprised. They are here to listen to one of a handful of people considered the collective conscience of the world. Elie Wiesel is a survivor of the Nazi death camps at Auschwitz and Buchenwald. His mother, his father, one of his three sisters, all perished, along with 6 million other Jews during the Holocaust. After the war, Wiesel studied in Paris, became a journalist, and wrote a book called Night about his experiences in the death camps. It was published in the U.S. in 1960. But if you looked at the New York Times paperback bestseller list only yesterday, you'd see that it's listed, with a little help from Oprah, as number 4, and been there now for more than 40 weeks. Wiesel has written 46 other books. He's a professor at Boston University, where he has taught philosophy and religion since 1976. He's the winner of many, many prizes, most notably the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986. And he lives by the simple credo that silence in the face of injustice, indifference, is unacceptable. When he received the Nobel Peace Prize, he said, "I swore never to be silent whenever, wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim." Professor Wiesel, welcome. We are honored by your presence.
Thank you.
I don't know exactly where to start, but I'll start with this question. If God were a journalist, what story would really absorb him today?
Ask him.
You've got better contacts, so you do that.
How do you know? Well, you know, I had a teacher. His name was Shaul Lieberman, a great Talmudic scholar. And once he asked me the following question. You've studied for 17 years. Which or who is the most tragic person in the Bible? I said, Abraham. He was asked to sacrifice his son. He said, no. I said, Isaac, after all. He was 37 already at that time. And all of a sudden, he saw his father with a knife in his hand. He said, no. I said, Moses, the loneliest man in the Bible, he always had problems, either with his people or with God. Always. He said, no. Then he said to me, he said, it's God. The most tragic character in the Bible is God. He created a good world, and look what we are doing with it. So God, looking down as a good journalist, says, what are they doing to my world, which is their world? Would he write a story? No.
He would not write a story.
No, he would not write a story. He would want me to write a story.
Because you'd be what? The witness on the scene.
I would be, yes, absolutely, the chronicler.
But he is up there looking down on it all, and he would have a better vantage point on what's going on. He'd be able to spot the story that would become a front-page story in the Times.
The problem with God is he would know too much. And if you know too much, you have no more questions. And I live with questions. And therefore, I think my story with all modesty, would be, humanly speaking, a better story.
What do you think God would say, or is saying now, about the Iranian President Ahmadinejad's call for the liquidation of the State of Israel?
Well, you know what I'm saying. I hope that God is saying the same thing. I believe that this man is a disgrace to diplomacy, to public affairs, or to humanity. After all, Iran is an ancient nation which has its moments of pride and grandeur. What he is doing to the name of Iran, who is he? What is he? He is the #1 Holocaust denier in the world. He simply goes on saying the Holocaust never occurred. He organized last month, I think, an international exhibit of anti-Holocaust cartoons. And when the organizer was asked, how long will it go on? He said, as long as Israel is not destroyed. Second, he said, Ahmadinejad said, there was no Holocaust, but there will be one. And he says it again and again and again. And he even says, what will happen? He said, Israel will be destroyed. Now remember, today you have, how symbolically, 6 million Jews in Israel. So 6 million Jews once more are being threatened by him. So I would say this man, first of all, must be declared persona non grata all over the world. He doesn't deserve to be part of civilization, doesn't deserve to be a member of the family of nations. And I would even go further. Iran should be excluded as long as he is president, because what do they say? They are threatening a member state of the United Nations with annihilation. It's against the Geneva Convention on Genocide, against the Charter of the United Nations. And yet, you know, the world is really not responding.
And this is what I was going to ask you. He has been saying all of these things now for the better part of a year. He is received wherever he goes quite handsomely. When he was in New York, the Council on Foreign Relations received him. In fact, they accepted a dinner invitation. What does that suggest about the mood of the world listening to this kind of call and yet accepting the man who makes the call?
Well, the dinner invitation, I was so angry then. I'm really angry. I was so angry that I said it. So they canceled the dinner. But
they did cancel the dinner?
Yes, they canceled the dinner. One dinner that was canceled thanks to me. I'm very proud of that. But nevertheless, they met. And so what it says, first of all, who is the world? Wherever I go and I speak about it, and I do speak about it all the time, because I believe really that when the enemy, and the enemy of the Jewish people is the enemy of humankind, has always been like that. We cannot separate anymore, not after the 20th century, history from history. The history of one people is the history, or part of the history, of the collective history of the world. And whenever one people, one nation, one community is targeted, all others are affected by it. So therefore, I say that this man should be, of course, not punished. I don't know what kind of punishment, but at least ostracized, excluded, in religious terms, excommunicated. However, the world doesn't listen, because I belong to a generation that learned to take the enemy's threats seriously. I take the enemy's threats more seriously than the friend's promises. But I'm alone, or at least I belong to a very small minority. Those who have power don't think that way. They look for all kinds of excuses not to respond, not to act. And yet this man wants to become a nuclear power, and he says that the first bombs will fall on Tel Aviv. There's something wrong over there. Something's wrong. And I'm surprised that people don't realize it.
Elie, in preparation for this interview, there was a question that has been asked of you 1,000 times, if not more. And I was saying to myself, there must be a good way of asking this question in a way that he hasn't heard it before, but I'm kidding myself, so I'm just going to put it to you. After what you have been through in the Holocaust, even post-Holocaust, but certainly then, what your family went through, how can you believe in God?
You can continue. How come that I believe in the humanity of man? How come that I believe in the fact that the other is not an enemy? How come? When in those times, look, in those times, again, I belong to a generation, to a people that were abandoned by God and betrayed by man. So how come that I believe still enough to go on working and teaching and writing and hoping that thanks to our tales, to our stories, to our witness, the world will be a better world? How come?
So how come?
The thing is, Marvin, you know that I favor questions over answers. Your question is my question as well, in truth.
How do you answer yourself when you ask that question?
Again, you know, the Jewish people learned something, that we question the question. But I think that I owe you, after all, Frank, at least a possible answer.
Do you have a more specific answer to the question, is there a devil?
The devil exists in us, in every one of us. And it's up to us to chain the devil. Chain the devil, disarm the devil. Mystically, I could say to you, take that devil and turn it into something more holy. You can. In mysticism, you can do anything. So you can do that too. But in truth about God, look, I come from a very, very religious background. When I was young, I was much more concerned with God than with my fellow students, with my classmates in the yeshiva and so forth. When I went to Auschwitz, in my bag, I had not only some shirt and clothes and food, I had a Talmudic tractate, which I was studying then, and I had it with me, with the prayer books. And you cannot imagine a childhood in my little town for a religious young man the way I was. In night, which is my first, you mentioned it, I have some very harsh words about God. But immediately afterwards, I also describe my prayers to God. I, as a Jew, believe one can be a good Jew and therefore a good human being. That goes for Catholics or for Muslims, with God or against God, but not without God. And therefore, after I came back to France in 1945 and went to the four orphanages, I threw myself back into study. Because another question should be, how come I remained sane? We have here Walter Reich, who's a friend of mine, a psychiatrist, one of the best. I asked him once, explain to me from the psychiatrist's viewpoint, how come that my generation, we were 400 young adolescents, that we didn't lose our sanity? Having seen what we have seen, having endured what we had endured, how come? Normally, medically, we should have lost our sanity. How come we didn't? In my case, I know. The moment I arrived to France, I plunged into study again. And I opened the tractate which I had brought with me, but of course a different tractate, at the same page that I had left. And I think I became as religious as before. But then I had, of course, you know, again, in psychiatry there's a term latency, which means the meaning of the event catches up with me later. And I had my questions. And I had a long period of crisis, of doubt. But I never stopped studying. You know, at that time, I had a choice between music. I was a choir conductor in one of the orphanages. I loved music. And I loved conducting because I had beautiful girls in the choir. And I fell in love with every one of them consecutively. But I was too timid to tell them, so they never knew, but I knew. And then I had a choice between music or philosophy. I chose philosophy because of the questions. And I left it because of the answers. But I teach philosophy nevertheless. So at that time, I went through a very, very long period of total rebellion. But I never lost faith in God. I was angry at God. And I directed my anger inside faith, not outside.
You once called your faith a wounded faith.
Absolutely, it's a wounded faith. Because the tragedy of the believer is much more profound than the tragedy of the non-believer.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm now. It means praying. I love prayers because of their poetry, and also because I say to myself, my father was religious, my grandfather was religious. I go back in our family to Rashi, to the 11th century, family after family, and all of them were believers, and I'm going to break it, the chain. I cannot do that.
Elie, tell me, what is your relationship to the Bible? I asked the question in an odd way. Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia walks around at all times with a copy of the Constitution in his pocket. And I was wondering, reading up on you, whether you walk around with a copy of the Bible in your pocket. And as I look at you, I can see that you don't.
How do you know?
I have a feeling.
It can be small.
What is your feeling about the Bible? Do you think that you have in front of you when you pick it up Holy Scripture, the text written by God or at the instigation of God? How do you look at the words? What do you think about?
First of all, wherever I travel, I have a Bible with me.
You do?
And a Talmudic tractate. I miss always. I have, wherever I go, traveling, I have a Talmudic tractate, studying every morning and praying. I love the Bible. I love it because it contains so much. It contains not only what we call the religious truth, but mainly morality. Every story could be a lesson for the whole semester. This year I'm teaching at Boston University, which has become one of the best universities in the country, really. And I teach this year I'm teaching one course, the Book of Job. Literally, the Book of Job, and every session is a part of a section of Job and a commentary on Job written by Jews and non-Jews, philosophers, moralists, and so forth. It's extraordinary, the beauty in all that. Especially the 5 books of Moses. Come on. To having the first verse, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. If I could have written this verse, I would have given up 47 books. Just this verse alone. Do you know how long we could spend, you and I, studying this verse, all the commentaries of Rashi and Ibn Ezra? You have no idea. So I love the Bible.
Why is there, at the same time as all of the lessons that you're talking about, there's a great deal of violence in the Bible? And particular sections of it which are fiercely violent, wiping out peoples. How does that comport with lessons in ethics? How does that work for you?
There, it's simple. It's what not to do.
What not to do.
Right. What not to do.
So here's, in other words, if you wipe out a people, this is what you shouldn't do.
You shouldn't do.
Well, why do you have to wipe them out then? Why don't you just sort of just tell people not to do it?
You think I know.
Because they're going to do it.
Because, look, it was the birth of a nation. You know, life begins with violence. The umbilical cord. You cut the umbilical cord. It's supposed to be a love. It begins with love. A man and a woman meet. You know, when I hear today, for instance, about the question, do we have the right to clone human beings? I said, come on, it costs so much money. It's so much simpler. A man and a woman get together, and you have a human being. You know? But look, it begins a history of every nation, of even every religion has violence. And you have a choice to begin with love and leave the violence for later, or start with violence and say, and now finished, no more violence. The worst book is not in the Bible of violence, it's the book of Joshua, the conquest of the land. It is, when you read it, you cannot read it. It goes literally from violence to violence, kill and kill and kill. But what is the good part about it? It has no poetry. The only sacred book of all the books of the prophets and the Bible and so forth, the only one that lacks poetry is the book of Joshua, which means if you have to do all that, do it, but don't make poetry out of it.
Elie, jumping ahead to a violent part of the world, and I said at the very beginning we would talk about the Bible, but we would also talk about the war, and the war that I have in mind is the one going on in Iraq at this time. And according to one of Bob Woodward's books, you were in Condoleezza Rice's office in February 2003 when President Bush entered. Obviously, he knew you were there. And the big issue then was, were we going to invade Iraq, which we ended up doing a month later. You are quoted in the book as saying, "It's a moral issue. In the name of morality, how can we not intervene?" And I'm wondering, a couple of years later now, whether you have any second thoughts about that.
At that time, the problem was not to invade Iraq. The problem was what to do, since we knew then that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And so they asked me. And I said then, Mr. President, I cannot hear myself say that I am for war, because I have seen war. And I even cannot say these words, except if it's a just war. But the only just war I know was the war against Hitler. They said, but what about weapons of mass destruction? And I said, Mr. President, in that case, it's very simple. Since we know that he has them, and by the way, at that time, Marvin, there wasn't a single intelligence service in the world. Mm-hmm. The French Deuxième Bureau, the Israeli Mossad, I spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister, the Israeli Minister of Defense. They all said he had weapons of mass destruction. And at that time, therefore, there was no doubt that he had them. There was no doubt that he would use them. He had used them against the Kurds in 1988. So I said, why not I became all of a sudden like a military strategist. I said, why not use the best American commandos, the best British commandos, the best Israeli commandos, but in American uniform. Let them go in the evening, destroy the weapons of mass destruction, leave in the morning without killing a single person. That was my
He didn't listen to you, did he?
But then, but we spoke there about more than that. I said, morally, yes. I believe in intervention. As someone who has spent, I think, almost my entire adult life fighting for human rights. What is human rights? Intervention. That when massive violations occur, and war is also a massive violation of human rights, then we must intervene. And I quoted again, my favorite commandment in the Bible is in Hebrew, Lo ta'amod al dam reyecha, thou shalt not stand idly by. That should be the religion almost, the religious commandment of all the organizations for human rights. Thou shalt not stand idly by. So I said, I call it intervention. Don't call it war. Mm-hmm. Don't make war. Intervene. That's why, for a week, by the way, the president then, wherever he spoke, he used the word intervention. But then other people came to him probably and spoke about war, so it was yours.
You used the word before, just war.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is that a Jewish idea, the idea of a just and an unjust war? And where does that come from? Is that a biblical injunction?
It began with the Jewish religion, of course, but then But then in Catholicism and in Christianity, you have Augustine wrote about
yes.
it, about the just war. In the Jewish religion, it's called Milchemet Mitzvah, just war, which means an obligatory war. Mm-hmm. And that war is so obligatory that you may take a groom away from his bride under the canopy, send him to the front. Why? That means the existence. Whenever the nation is in danger of losing its existence, then it's a defensive war, which means a just war is a defensive war.
An existential threat, then, can justify war or intervention, as you say.
No, in that case, even war, I imagine. But I'm not a general. But.
As you well know, we all know that the Baker-Hamilton Study Group on Iraq will soon produce its report. The Pentagon is talking about a report. The White House is talking about a report. I'm wondering if there's a Wiesel report that you'd like to share with us now about what should, perhaps only from a moral point of view or from a practical point of view, what should the United States be doing now in Iraq?
I have a plan.
What's your plan?
The President of the United States goes to Europe, to London, to France, to all of the traditional allies of the United States, and as gently as possible, as respectfully as possible, should say, look, we wanted you to help us get into Iraq, and you refused. Now come and help us get out. How? We need actually one thing. We cannot just leave like that. We cannot be defeated. It would destroy many structures in the whole world, not only there. So we must establish a stable government in Iraq and bring everything. But for this we need, I don't know how many, another 100 or 200 or 400,000 troops. Help us. And in a year, we promise you, we all leave in 1 year. Once Iraq will be able then to live in security and respect for its citizens and so forth.
On the assumption that the extra troops would provide the security that the government can survive.
Absolutely. That's my plan, but you know, I am not an official advisor of the President.
Let us just remind our listening and viewing audience that this is the Kalb Report. I'm Marvin Kalb. Our guest is Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize laureate, the writer, the professor, the conscience of so many of us. You once said, Professor, we are the great power now, and power is not great because it has better armies or more money. Power is great because of moral strength and a moral message. Do you really think that we now have moral strength in the world and a moral message to provide to the world?
You read me well. We are in a mess, really. In Iraq, it's a mess. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. Somehow, something went wrong there again. I think, again, in the beginning, the intervention was justified because we thought we knew about the weapons of mass destruction. My feeling is the moment the President knew that it wasn't so, he should have addressed the nation on television and said, my fellow citizens, all of us thought so. Therefore, we had to go in. Now we realize he didn't have to. And I apologize. But it wasn't my fault. It was nobody's fault. We had to do it. Now we have to deal with a new chapter in history. How to get out and how to bring back stability and honor to that ancient nation.
Elie, how does the U.S. at this point restore its moral position in the world?
The U.S. is not very well seen today, morally speaking. But let's not forget one thing. Those who judge America, they have much to respond also. So
yes,
who are our judges, really? Therefore, it's not for them. But
well, maybe the criticism is so severe because so much more is expected of the United States.
Correct. And that is correct, by the way. Because we are, as I said, you quoted me, we are the only great superpower today in the world. And therefore, that implies a moral obligation. That means to be moral ourselves. How to do it? I don't have enough knowledge of what is happening there. You see generals generals in active service who say one thing. The moment they leave the uniform, they say something else. So whom am I to believe? Which general is telling the truth? But one thing I do know, that Iraq under Saddam Hussein was a dictatorship. We know that he killed many of his own citizens. We know that he was a brutal murderer. That we know because we know. That's common knowledge. Something had to be done. Whether we could go back, having discovered about the weapons of mass destruction, how to do that. I would have organized then, if I had the presidency, I would have organized immediately, having discovered that. In the White House conference, we had closed doors and bring not only military people, but diplomats and moralists. Say, what do we do now? We lived under a kind of a mirage, of a wrong assumption that he had those weapons, and therefore we went in. We must think morally. Now the question is this: who in the White House has done it? Maybe they have, but I don't know about it. Just to think morally, which goes very, very far. What is the moral dimension of history? And that is the question.
To the degree, Elie, that you know President Bush, do you feel that even at this late date, he is capable of standing up before the nation and saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake?
I hope so. It would add to his prestige, to his stature. You tell me.
No,
you live in Washington. I don't live in Washington.
Elie, you have said the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. You have refused to be indifferent to the criminality in Darfur, the brutal regime in North Korea. You've tried to help the Bosnian Muslims. The question in my mind is the evil in the world, represented by what I've just said, is the evil in the world so great and so pervasive that you may, on occasion, feel that you're baying at the moon and that no matter how many times you say this is wrong, human rights are being violated, that the practice would continue, sadly?
I would continue anyway.
You do it anyway? I
would do it anyway, simply because if not, you quoted myself, I would say that neutrality, my neutrality would be make me into an accomplice, and I don't want to be an accomplice. I would do it anyway.
Elie, you've always been a strong supporter of Israel. In fact, I read just recently that Prime Minister Olmert was thinking of asking you to be president of Israel a couple of months ago, but why did you reject that, by the way?
I wanted to be here with you tonight. No, really, it's not for me. I am not I don't know what to do with power. I have no power. And it's not for me, really. I told him, come on.
If you don't have power, what have you got?
Words. Just a few words.
A few words?
Yeah, just words.
47 books. Elie, what were your feelings last summer when Israel was fighting the Hezbollah in Lebanon? And the reports were coming in that Israel, in fact, was not able to achieve a military victory for the first time?
I felt close to despair because something happened there. Israel usually went in and out. Israel until now, whatever Israel did was really, from my viewpoint, really morally, it had to defend itself. Mm-hmm. And therefore, Israel's war, I was in Israel during the Six-Day War. I went during the Yom Kippur War. Israel was always attacked or ready to be attacked. This time, excuse me, this time, it wasn't that clear. It wasn't that clear. Of course, we knew that Hezbollah was attacking, but it wasn't that clear what to do. And I had a feeling that Israel itself didn't know how to respond. And therefore, it lasted longer than any other war in Israel. So I felt forlorn. Who would have imagined that Hezbollah, 3,000 people, would last that long? But Israel is going through now a soul-searching period, which is to its honor.
You remember 10 years ago, you were of the view, as were many other people, that the peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians was such that there was no turning back, that you had to move forward, there was no going back. And now, 10 years later, what's your sense of that peace process? Do you think it even exists at this point?
Oh, Marvin, I was here in the White House, as you were, with Rabin, Peres, and Arafat. And I must tell you, it was one of the great moments that I had after the war. I felt, to breathe like that.
Take a deep breath.
Exactly, it's enough. Come on, it's enough now. Now it's a new chapter. And I was very optimistic. I all of a sudden was open to hope, to great hope. Not only for Israel's security, but in general for Israel's place in its history there. It's enough, just it's enough. How long can it go on? And the problem was Arafat. Arafat, I think, is much to be blamed, really. Much to be blamed. The man did not, he could have, the last conference with President Clinton at Y, when Barak gave up so much, and they simply said no. Didn't explain why. Simply said no. So what happened then, really, is, first of all, Arafat is to be blamed a lot.
Do you think there will be a time, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, when for most Arabs and for most Arab states, the presence of a Jewish state will be simply a fact that has to be accepted, not happily, but accepted, and we're moving on, we're living with it, we're going to have peace agreements. There are two Arab countries that have peace treaties with Israel.
Egypt and Jordan.
All right, so maybe there could be 10. Do you see a future like that?
There must be a future like that.
There must be.
There must be, therefore there will be.
And therefore there will be.
Yeah. There must. They cannot go on like that. Just cannot. It's not good for anybody. The Palestinians themselves, they are still in their refugee camps. They could have been resettled long ago in Arab countries. But they always hope to reconquer. There must be, and therefore there will be.
There are people, as you well know, in this city and around the world who feel that we're moving perilously close to a time when we will not be able to have a two-state solution, when the extremists in Hamas, in Hezbollah, will push toward a situation of such awful, perpetual agony that the heart and soul of the Israeli nation just loses steam.
I don't think so. I think, look, Israel has a history. After 2,000 years of exile, a new state was created. And it was created at a certain time, 3 years after the worst tragedy of our people and the world, the worst. 3 years later. Had it lasted, had the negotiations lasted a year later, there would be no Israel today. The last time America and Russia voted together was on Israel. 1948 already, before this declaration of the state of Israel in February, the Iron Curtain came down. And Russia already would never have voted with Israel again. Right. So it was a matter of a few days almost. Wow. It was, if you don't believe in destiny, believe in God. Okay, but believe. It was there.
Right.
So therefore, something happened. I don't think that the Jewish people could absorb another tragedy. It couldn't. Because we are still in a period when those who went through that tragedy are living witnesses. The last, but they are still here. And then there are their children. We couldn't take another catastrophe. We cannot. And therefore, there will not be another catastrophe. And therefore, the only way is to find a way to live in peace with its neighbors. And there are enough people in Israel who want that, who pray for that, who fight for that. They want it. It's enough. History has been made occasionally, but this kind of gesture, it's enough. The 30-year-old war, the 100-year-old war, we cannot, not now. With the weapons that all sides have, we cannot. And therefore, I'm convinced that there will be peace, I think, in our lifetime between the Arabs and Palestinians.
There are a lot of people, Elie, who hope so with you.
Yeah.
Let me ask my last question in another way. The last time you were here and on this program, you were here with a number of other people. It was a year after 9/11. And one of the things you said toward the end of the program was that you were unhappy that there was not a Muslim representative among the 4 people who were with us that evening. And I guess my question is that there are many people who are of the Muslim faith who say with great conviction that their religion is a religion of peace. Absolutely. And yet there are many people who are extremists who use the religion in order to be incredibly destructive, cruelly destructive, almost mindlessly destructive. So I ask you for your judgment call on what is going on now among Muslims as to the direction of their faith.
Our mistake was long ago. Under John the 23rd was a very great pope. A dialogue began between Jews and Christians, a marvelous dialogue, all over the world. Protestants and mainly Catholics under John the 23rd, which went on. We forgot the third partner, Islam. At that time already, we should have invited the representatives, religious representatives of Islam to join the 3 monotheistic religions. Somehow we forgot it, and that's a mistake. Is it too late? It's never too late. I think we should continue trying, but it's not easy. Now it's not easy. Not easy because in Islam, those who are for, let's say, respect among religions, for a coexistence among at least the monotheistic religions, those who are for that are so afraid of the extremists that they don't dare to talk about it. I know I had friends among them, important intellectuals there. To now, they are afraid. Very few dare. So therefore, it's not easy anymore. But a time will come, that must come. We cannot just live in a constant state of tension among religions, among nations, among communities.
There's another example, Elie, that you are a man of faith. And it's not a wounded faith. You have a real faith.
No, it's a wounded faith. It's a wounded faith. What I write is my faith is wounded. Even my faith in humanity is also wounded.
But every time I press you, you come back with an expression of faith that it will work because it has to work. That's faith.
Okay, I accept.
That's faith. And that's not wounded. We've talked all too briefly about the Bible. I'm going to my headline here and the war. And I want to spend a little time, the concluding minutes, talking about the media. Because you were a journalist.
Right.
And I always say that once a journalist, always a journalist. So I'm going to assume you are right now. So put on your pundit cap and tell us the meaning of the last election.
Here?
Right here.
As a journalist, I loved my profession then because I was the one who asked the question.
But now journalists are always answering. They're giving you answers.
That's why I left the profession.
Right.
No, I think, look, it's simple here. It's very simple. I think the war in Iraq, which began in the beginning again, I think in the beginning it was meant to be almost a just war, the proper thing to do. Because again, what was in the beginning? The beginning was simply weapons of mass destruction, and we couldn't allow a nation that has already committed so many crimes to possess those weapons. Right? Then we discovered they had no such weapons. Okay, and therefore I think there was a malaise, a real malaise in the American electorate, and hence you have the results of the elections. What to do now? I think, again, there is no doubt that something must be done.
We will put the Wiesel plan into action.
My plan? All right, I'm ready for that.
Was there a journalist in the Bible?
Moses was supposed to have written the Bible. He was the first journalist for it.
Moses?
Moses, of course, he wrote the Bible. It's called the Book of Moses. And he was, the difference is, he who was the greatest of all was the humblest of all men. Show me a journalist who is as humble as Moses.
Can you define something like journalism in the Bible?
Read the Bible, it's journalism. It gives
Why do you say that?
It tells you, show me again another journalist who will go back to the beginning of creation. And there you have, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. There was a journalist who wrote it.
There were scribes then, right?
Scribes
3,000 years ago.
Later on, the scribes in the beginning. But the scribes, as a profession, was in Talmudic times.
And were scribes the closest thing in those years to a journalist?
The prophets were the journalists.
The prophets?
Of course. The scribes simply
They would like to think so today, that they're prophets. I'm not sure.
But look, the scribes scribed what they were told to write. What did they write then? First of all, the 5 books of Moses. That was their profession, their trade.
Uh-huh.
But clearly, the prophets, you read the prophets, you have a picture of the situation of a kingdom called the kingdom of, during Isaiah, during Jeremiah. You can describe the daily life of a Jew who lived in the land of Israel in the time of Isaiah, simply by reading Isaiah.
Now, I just want to understand this. Were the scribes told what to write, or did they observe themselves and decide what it is that was truthful, and then they would write that?
Both.
Both.
The scribe spoke God's words to man, so to speak, and man's words to God.
Huh.
Today you would call them journalists, but wrongly.
How did people communicate in those days, Elie? Were there established means of communication so that you would know in one community what it is that another community was thinking, plotting, planning?
There were a lot of travelers there at that time. And the sages themselves, the teachers, traveled all the time. Oh. We had communities in Babylon, we had communities in Egypt, everywhere. And they were traveling, teaching, they were teachers. And they were the great communicators. And the beautiful part really is, sometimes you have in one verse in the Talmud, somebody asked a question, a different person answered, a third person contradicted the second, and the fourth made the analysis. And the 4 lived in 4 different generations who never met. But they met on the page.
That's fascinating.
Come and study.
I thought I did, but apparently I didn't. When you jump ahead to today's time with the internet and websites and iPods and all, first of all, are you familiar with that world? When you write a book, do you use a word?
By hand.
You use it by hand. With a pen or a pencil?
Pen.
A pen.
And the moment I finish a book, I put the pen away, I buy a new pen. So I have 47 pens.
Do you write in English?
No. My books are written in French.
All of your books are in
All
French?
of my books in French.
And it's your wife who does the translation?
She used to, but then we created a foundation after the Nobel, and she's so involved in that. The only book that she accepted afterwards is Retranslating Night, and therefore it's so good and so special. But she's the best translator I ever had.
Do you write every day?
Every day except Sabbath or the holidays.
Except the Sabbath.
I observe the Sabbath.
But aside from the Sabbath, you write every single day?
Every day.
Even days when you're teaching?
Right.
Do you have a special time of the day when you write?
In the morning. The first, I get up very early in the morning.
Like how
5
early?
o'clock in the morning.
5 a.m.
Yeah. I sleep 4 hours a night.
That much? Huh?
A lot.
And you really can just get out of bed and start writing?
No, come on. Bed, need coffee after.
Yeah, right.
But I work every day.
What are you writing now?
I always write two at the same time, non-fiction and fiction at the same time.
You write 2 books at the same time?
Always.
All the
fiction and
time?
non-fiction, all the time.
So what's your fiction book now?
Cannot tell you.
What's your non-fiction book?
Oh, that's something else. That I write a kind of 3rd volume of my memoirs, and I called it really, I have 2 books of memoirs. And this one is called, actually, My Teachers and My Friends. It's a 1,000-page memoir.
Elie, what's your view of, do you watch television news, by the way?
News, yes. Yes, at least every day I watch the news, really.
Have you noticed any changes in television news?
Yes, the people changed. The events remain the same, but people change.
You like the change of having a...
I don't
Do you have a favorite anchor?
Look, come on. You was to be an anchor. I cannot tell you anything.
Okay. I was wondering what your view is of the functioning of the modern media today. Do you think they're doing a good job? Do you think that they are advancing all of the causes that you hold dear to your heart?
No. I would like more depth.
You would like more depth?
Yeah, more depth.
Was there a time when there was depth?
No, but each time they should learn from it at least. They should have more depth. Because look, I know I'm not naive. I know that a minute in television costs a lot of lots of money, and therefore every minute counts. But I would still like more depth. Really. But then I'm naive in these matters.
I was just wondering whether, in terms of some of the large issues that you think about, and given the importance of the media in our society, whether your view is that the media is advancing civilization or, in effect, going the other way.
No, in general, the media is honest and doing a good work. But I would like to hear, for instance, more from a philosopher. A philosopher. Once a week, give me a program of a philosopher, a poet. That means the chroniclers of tomorrow. Today's poetry can become a chronicle of tomorrow. And go deeper, something. Don't remain equal to yourself. Go beyond, transcend the moment. That's what I would like. But then I'm sure you wouldn't get much publicity, so it's advertisement. You need advertisement.
Elie, you ever considered a political role for yourself?
Naturally, not President of the United States, but no, never.
No,
it's not for me, really.
Can you share with us whether you are a Democrat or a Republican?
Is it fair? Look, I'm not registered of anything. I'm not registered Democrat or Republican. But let's say, until now, I've always been closer to the Democrats. My friends were more Democrats than Republicans. But I cannot tell you how I vote, because in America it's secret.
No, that's a big secret. But what is your view of the current president?
I haven't seen him already since that meeting, really.
Ah, I see.
But you know, I met this president in a very special moment. I came to give a lecture in Texas. And they told me, he was governor then, and they told me the governor would like to see you. It was a big pleasure. So he came, he was governor of Texas, to my hotel room. He left his entourage in the corridor, and we sat down and we talked. It was a very nice chat, nothing profound, but just nice chat. Then I said, Mr. Governor, I'm terribly sorry, now I have to go, I have a press conference. He said, I'll come with you. So he came with me. After the press conference, I said, Mr. Governor, it's so nice of you to come. He said, where are you going now? I said, now there's a dinner in my honor. I'll go with you to dinner. All right, he came to dinner. The people there were all surprised, the governor for dinner. Afterwards, I said, Mr. Governor, it's so nice of you to be here and so forth, but now I have a lecture. I'll come to the lecture. I said, Governor, I'll come. Not only that, he said, you know, I'm going to call Laura and my daughters. They should come to your lecture. He himself called them up in my presence, and they come to the lecture. Okay. So afterwards, there was a reception. It was already 10 in the evening. It began at 3 afternoon. And I took him to the corner. Mr. Governor, I said, between us, what are you doing here?
Elie, I'm so sorry that our time's up. I want to thank our co-sponsors, George Washington University, the National Press Club, the Shorenstein Center at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Our program is underwritten by Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. I want to thank our wonderful audience, but most of all, I want to thank our very special guest, Elie Wiesel, for making this such a memorable evening. Thank you, Elie, very much. I'm Marvin Kalb. Good night and good luck.